Yo, what's up guys? It's the new sensation, Bigger Notation here, and today I have a very special deck profile for you guys because it's one of my favorite decks. I've been playing it for a very long time since it came out, and that is going to be the Agents of Destruction deck profile. So by the time of this recording, there should be a gameplay video of my best of 3 match against Rising Phoenix Odyssey on my channel. So if you're interested in seeing this deck in action, I definitely recommend checking that out. If that's not up yet, then I'll have it up over the next couple of days, but I'm not sure. It depends on the time that this video goes up and whenever I get around to recording that. But I'm hoping to have that up before this video goes out. So if you're watching this, I'll probably have a link in the description to the gameplay, and I hope you enjoy that. But yeah, basically this is a deck that I've really enjoyed playing ever since it came out. I've been messing around with it, and I kind of took a break from it for a little while with the recent Unison free play stuff coming out and Spirit Boost. Basically since set 10 and the whole Unison block came out, I've kind of left this deck and kind of moved on from it a little bit because of like all of the new free play counterplay stuff. It doesn't really work too well with this deck from what I'd tested beforehand, but now with the release of set 14 and with the there's a couple of new Agents of Destruction cards that people seem to have forgot were actually Agents of Destruction cards, which I figured I might as well throw this deck together again and give it a test, and it's actually been working really well. I think that this deck can definitely be a strong competitor in the metagame as of current, because the metagame has recently slowed down quite a lot due to the emergency ban list that came out, hitting a bunch of the aggro decks. I think that this deck can definitely rise to popularity as a strong aggro to mid-range deck, and that's kind of the way that I've built it. I'm going to be messing around with a couple of builds for this deck in the near future, hopefully, so I should be able to bring you a couple of different builds for the channel. But we'll get straight into the leader. So he just treats all Agents of Destruction cards in your hand as if they had no specified cost. This is really important for the deck because your Agents of Destruction are spread out across a bunch of different colors. So you're going to have, this is a rainbow deck, so you're going to have a bunch of different energy charged, and it means that you don't have to worry about which color energy you're charging that much, and you can charge whatever you want from your hand and all of the rest of your hand will still be playable. So that's really helpful. And then it's got a very nice auto. When it swings, you can optionally take a life to your hand, and then regardless of whether you took the life or not, you get to look at the top 5 cards from your deck and add up to 1 card with Agent of Destruction in its card name to your hand, then shuffle your deck. Just to clarify, cards that have Agents of Destruction or any sort of variation of Agent of Destruction, I believe they're still considered targets from this effect, and this effect is prevalent in a couple of other cards as well, where it specifies card names with Agent of Destruction. And so if it's plural, where it says like Agents of Destruction or Agent of Destructions or whatever, I believe that those still count as targets. Correct me if I'm wrong down below, but that's what I've heard. I'm pretty sure Bandai released a specific ruling on that when these cards came out in the anniversary box last year. His Awaken is very simple. It's just when your life is at 4 or less, you can draw a card and untap 1. So obviously on his front side, first thing important to note is he not only does he search your deck every time he swings, but he also has Self-Awakening, which is really helpful, especially for this deck is going to be built more towards the aggro or mid-range side of the spectrum. So you're going to be looking to awaken your leader on your own a lot of the time, because a lot of the decks you'll be facing will be slower than your deck, so you want to awaken as fast as possible. On the back side, he has the same permanent to get rid of all specified costs, and then he has 2 activate mains. On the back side, it's very important to note he doesn't draw, and I'm thinking of testing out this deck or a similar version of this deck with the Soul Striker leader, the reboot Soul Striker leader, that is, because on the backside of that leader you still get to draw 1 and you get to untap 2. The reason I chose this leader is because on the front side he's way stronger than Soul Striker is. Soul Striker is also a little bit more reliant on you running a 3-cost Unison, and so that means you kind of have to take the deck in a more mono blue route, and this version of the deck is definitely taken in a more blue focused route. but it's definitely not blue enough to be running like the 3-cost unisons and get them down consistently enough. So that's part of the reason I chose for this specific leader. But also a big reason that I chose the Agents of Destruction leader over Soul Striker for this profile was because he has an activate main. Once per turn you can tap 3 energy, and then you get to play a unison from your hand with Agent of Destruction in its card name with 3 markers on it. So you basically get to play any of your Agent of Destruction unisons from hand on turn 3, regardless of their specified cost or anything like that. And if that weren't good enough, he has a second activate main, where you just get to, once per turn, free play an Agent of Destruction card with an energy cost of 2 or less from your hand. And that is really, really strong in combination with some of the other cards in the deck, which I'm going to get into in a second. But this is a really, really powerful effect. The backside effects where you just get to play stuff for reduced cost or for free is really powerful, and that's what really helps you push the aggression in this deck. So to start off with the Agents of Destruction, for anyone who's played AOD decks before, you're going to be wanting to play your Babadies. For those who don't know, this is a very, very simple card. If you've played the original Lord Slug deck, you'll probably be quite familiar with this card because it's very similar to the Wings, where it's 1k barrier. It has the permanent where you can only control 1 copy of this card, so it's effectively unique. He also has the same permanent as your leader, where he takes away all specified cost from your Agents of Destruction cards, which is helpful if you're planning to run a different leader to this leader. Like if you run the Soul Striker leader, it can actually be really, really helpful. Or if you run, I know people used to run this engine with Green Gohan before that got banned, but if you run any other leader other than this leader, then that permanent is actually really impactful. And he also has a permanent where he reduces the energy cost of all Agents of Destruction cards in your hand by 1. So all of your 3 costs become 2 costs, and what's especially important about that is that because it reduces the cost in your hand, if you have 3 cost AOD cards in your hand, your leader activate main can actually free play them because they're considered 2 costs in your hand. So that's really, really important to note, because you're effectively able to free play a 3-drop from your hand every single turn with your leader activate main, which is incredibly powerful for any sort of deck. Now you may be thinking, obviously this card seems very, very strong for the deck. You're going to be wanting to get this guy down turn 1 every single game, so why would you only run 3? And the reason for that is because we're going to run 4 copies of the AOD Hatchiyak to go alongside it. This is very reminiscent of the OG Broly engine that's been played in OG Broly, with the 3 copies of Demonic Restraint and then 4 of the 8-drop Broly that searches it out. It's similar sort of theory. You want to run 3 copies of the target and 4 copies of the Searcher, because that's going to give you the best results, because you want to see the Searcher over the target because it will deck thin your deck by 1. And running an 8th copy of this Babadi is not really worth it in terms of seeing the card, because it's only going to impact a very, very small portion of your opening hands, and it's going to impact a very, very large portion of your games, because you'll dead draw Babadi a lot more than you will draw it and have it be useful. So anyway, what this Hatchiyak does is you can activate main, pay 1 energy and discard this card from your hand, and then you can play up to 1 Evil Wizard Babadi card with an energy cost of 1 from your deck or drop area, and then you shuffle your deck if you look through it. So this has obvious synergy with like the Majin Vegeta. If any of you have played Majin Vegeta, you'll know what this card does a little bit. But he brings out the Babadi from your deck or drop area, and that's another reason why you only need to run 3 of the Babadi, because this Hatchiyak is searchable off of a lot of your cards, and you can revive the Babadi from your drop area if your opponent manages to kill it. Also, something that's important to note is Babadi is not an Agent of Destruction in either its card name nor its things in the bottom right. I think they're called jobs or titles or something, I can't remember. But it doesn't have the, oh yeah, I think it's traits. It doesn't have the trait of Agent of Destruction in the bottom right of the card, so it's not searchable in any way, but this Hatchiyak is searchable off of your leader, front side, auto when it swings, and off of a bunch of cards throughout the deck, which we'll get into later. Now, Hatchiyak is very, very useful because he also has a second auto. He's a 3-drop 20k, which will become a 2-drop thanks to this Babidi being on the board. And when he's played, you can warp one of your opponent's battle cards that cost 4 or less, and then you can put up to 3 battle cards from your opponent's drop area at the bottom of their deck in any order. So it's going to be nice removal if you're struggling for removal and if you need to warp a card specifically, and it's also very, very good for drop area disruption. So especially good against green if you want to get rid of their Ribrians, and maybe if they have some other drop area stuff. Or if you're playing against a deck like Soul Striker and they might be running Saiyan Instinct, you can bottom deck those. Bojack just comes in really nicely with that auto. Very situational, but it's a lot better than dead drawing another Babidi, I guess. So those are the main cards that you want to be getting out turn 1. Just you want to be digging for that Babidi every single turn 1 that you can, because it just makes the rest of your deck 1 energy cheaper, which is really incredible. So for some of the 2-drops, we're going to go through the 2-drop AODs first, bearing in mind that all of these will become 1 cost as long as you have your Babidi on the board. First off, one of the better cards in the deck, we have the Garlic Junior 2-drop. We're running 4 copies of this guy. He's very simple. He's a 2-drop, 15k. He has a counter attack, negate the attack, and then play this card. So you have a built-in negate in your engine, which is really, really powerful because it means it's searchable through things like your leader auto. And he also has the skill of when this card is played, you play up to 1 Agent of Destruction card with an energy cost of 2 other than copies of this card from your deck with its skills negated for the turn, then shuffle your deck. So you can bring out any of your 2-drops from the deck and their skills will be negated for the turn, which is a little bit annoying, but it'll come into play later down the line, and I'll explain why that's not such a detriment to you anyway. Something that's important to note with this specific skill is that even if you have Babidi on the board, you can't be bringing out 3 costs from your deck with this card, because Babidi only reduces the cost of your AODs in your hand, not in your deck. So you can't be bringing out 3 costs with this guy, sadly. I would love that would be a thing. So to pair nicely with our Garlic Junior, we have our inbuilt engine counterattack. Now we also have 4 copies of our inbuilt engine counterplay, and this card in my opinion is probably the best card in the deck, or one of my favorites at least, because it offers you a bunch of interaction with your opponent during their turn. So this guy is another 2-drop 15k, bearing in mind that he'll become a 1 cost when Babidi is on the board. He has a counterplay. If your leader is an agent, has Agent of Destruction in its card name, and the battle card being played has an energy cost of 3 or less, it is placed in its owner's drop area instead of being played, and then play this card, and then your opponent chooses 1 card in their hand and discards it. So if your opponent is playing a card that costs 3 or less, you drop this guy down, and the card being played gets sent to the drop, and your opponent has to discard a card. So for 1 energy, you're getting a 15k body, and your opponent is going -2 and losing energy. So this is an insanely strong effect. Not only that, but when he's played, you can choose up to 2 Evil Wizard cards, which is your only target for that will be the Babidi, or cards with Agent of Destruction in their card names in your drop area, and shuffle them into the deck. So it's going to be a nice way to keep your deck healthy, put some good cards like some super combos or some of your more powerful cards back into the deck, and sometimes it will come in nicely if you feel like you're going to mill out, which honestly comes up quite a bit with this deck because it really digs through its deck. You can search out a lot of cards in this deck and you will get very, very thin decks later into the game. So this card is just incredibly, incredibly strong, and another reason why I think you should be running the specific Majin Buu leader with this deck, because if you don't run this leader, you don't have access to this Android 13, and this Android 13 is just completely insane. He's a target for the Garlic Junior negate if you want another 15k body, but there are better targets which I'm going to get into just now. So another one of our 4 of 2 cost cards is going to be the 2-cost Turles Aod. So he's a 2-drop 15k, again he's going to be 1 cost with Babidi. He's barrier unique, and he is a very, very simple skill. When this card attacks, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck and you add 1 card with Agent of Destruction in its card name to your hand. So it's basically the same as your leader's frontside auto, but it's printed on a 15k barrier unique battle card. So if you're on your front side, you're going to be able to +3 every turn, because you'll +2 from the auto on your leader, because you'll be taking a life and you'll be grabbing an AoD from the top 5, and then you'll be +1ing from the Turles. Turles is barrier, so he's very, very tricky to remove. And oftentimes if your opponent has barrier removal, they're going to have a hard time choosing between removing the Turles and removing your Babidi. So that's just a nice way to force your opponent to kill a card other than Babidi if they have barrier removal. Also, what's nice about him is he is a target off of the Garlic Jr., and he's one of the stronger targets, because if you negate the attack during your opponent's turn, because Garlic Jr. has his counter attack skill, right? So you can negate an attack during your opponent's turn, bring out Turles. Turles has its skills negated for the turn, but as soon as your opponent passes turn, Turles gains his skills back, and then you can swing and you can search the top 5. And this is going to be your main way of gaining card advantage in the early game, especially if you awaken really early on, because once you awaken you don't have card draw in your leader, but Turles is going to be able to help kind of keep your hand size up even though you don't have card draw in your backside. So to round off the 2-cost AoDs, we have another 4 of, and that is the 4 of Lord Slug, Mighty Agent of Destruction. He's a very, very unique card within the game of Dragon Ball Super, because he's one of the few super combos that has an effect when he's on the board rather than when he's comboed with. So he's the super combo that I've chosen to go with for of the Lord Slug. He is a super combo, unique, 15k. That's really important because he's actually going to be on the board a lot of the time when you play this deck. So he's 15k, and when your opponent activates a counterplay skill, they choose 2 cards in their hand and discard them. So this is incredibly strong for any sort of aggro or mid-range deck that's maybe trying to play around cards like the God Sealing Trunks or any sort of counterplays. And this card is especially strong right now because blue is such a prevalent color in the meta right now. Because of the emergency ban list, aggro is kind of dead at the moment. And the main contenders for the meta at the moment is like hand control and blue, basically. So a lot of your matchups are going to be against blue decks, and this card completely shuts down a lot of blue decks because they rely on a lot of their counterplay skills. And if they're losing 2 cards from their hand every time they counterplay a card, it's going to be really tricky for them. Now, this card is 1 cost because of your Babidi being on the board most of the game, but that's not how you're generally going to be playing him, because most of the time what you want to do is you want to negate an attack with your Garlic Jr., and if you don't already, if you don't already control a Lord Slug, you can bring him out from the deck, and then Lord Slug's skills will be negated during your opponent's turn, but then as soon as it becomes your turn again, his skills are live, and you can play out a bunch of battle cards without worry of counterplay skills coming into play, because as soon as your opponent counterplays a card, they have to drop 2 cards. So that's going to be your main way to bring him out. And also what's really nice about that is even if you're trying to be really defensive, you can still bring out Lord Slugs off of the Garlic Jr. because you can just then immediately use them as a super combo on the board. The fact that they don't draw off of their super combo skill, or they don't even have a skill when they're comboed with, is not really a massive problem for this deck because you have quite a large hand size throughout most of the game with this deck because you have so much card draw. And the fact that this card is searchable off of your leader skill, off of Turles, off of a couple of cards we'll get into later, and it's able to be brought out by Garlic Jr. is really helpful. Oftentimes, if there aren't many enticing picks off of my leader auto or off of Turles, I'll just take the super combo. Even if I already have copies out on the board from Garlic Jr., it's just worth taking because it's a super combo and it's that good. Something else that's important to note is you can also shuffle this guy back into your deck once you've used them with Android 13, and that's going to help make sure that you always have targets to bring out with Garlic Jr. Because a problem with this deck is that 8 of your targets for Garlic Jr., 4 being the Lord Slug and 4 being Turles, have unique. So if you already have 1 copy of them out, you can't bring out another copy, and you can't bring out a copy of Garlic Jr. off of his own skill. So a lot of the times, if you're going for the kill turn and you already have Turles and Lord Slug on the board, you'll find that you'll just be tapping 1 for the Garlic Jr. to bring in an Android 13 and just use them as 2 15k bodies to swing with. because for 1 energy, that is still a really strong play, especially if your opponent is looking really low on life and low on hand. So going off from the 2 costs into the 3 costs, bear in mind that these cards are going to be your main free plays off of your leader backside activate main, because they're going to become 2 costs in your hand while you control a Babidi. And that means that there'll be targets for your leader's backside activate main skill. And these are going to be your main targets for your activate main skill, because it's going to be the most energy efficient way to play the deck if you're playing the more expensive cards for free rather than the 2-drop cards which are reduced to 1 cost. So to start off with, we have 4 copies of Broly, Invincible Agent of Destruction. He's a 3-drop 20k, he reduces himself to 2 cost when you have Babidi down. He has an activate main for 1 energy where you discard this card and then you add 1 card with Agent of Destruction in its card name from your drop area to your hand. This does not come up all that much, but sometimes it can be really, really clutch. Most of the time you just prefer to have the energy open and you'd rather keep him in your hand because he's pretty strong as a card to play as well. But yeah, most of the time you just want to keep the energy over using the activate main skill, because you're not gaining advantage off of that activate main skill because you discard 1 to add 1 back. So it's not that great, but it can come up sometimes, like if you need an extra negate in your hand, or you need an extra counterplay, or you want to gain advantage off of your AOD extra card, which we'll get into later. He can just be okay with that effect sometimes, but his main utility within the deck is his auto. When this card is played, you choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards with an energy cost of 5 or less, KO it, then look at up to 3 cards from the top of your deck, add 1 of them to your hand, and then place the remaining cards in your drop area. So he's very similar to the self-search leader effect, where he can search the top 3 cards of your deck and add any one of them to your hand. It doesn't have to be an Agent of Destruction or anything like that, you just pick one of them and add it to your hand. And something that I've realized is that because it can be any card, I'm pretty sure that you don't have to show which card you're adding. So you can just take the card and then discard the other 2. And that's really powerful. And then not only that, but he also KOs a card that costs 5 or less, which is really nice removal and comes in really strong. It's a bit of a shame that he has a cost restriction of being 5 or less KO, but it doesn't come up all that often, and most of the time you are able to deal with your opponent's board pretty easily. This deck, as a mid-range deck, when you're playing against an aggro deck and you want to play a bit more of a mid-range game plan, it can work out really well, because this deck has some really strong removal and card advantage, ways to gain card advantage, that is. So getting on to some of the other 3 drops, these will obviously be some of the older AOD cards, because most of the older AOD stuff are the 3 drops. We're running 1 copy of the Android 13 Agent of Destruction. He's 3-drop 20k critical, he'll become 2 cost when Babidi's out, of course. He's very simple, he just has an activate main for 2 energy. Bear in mind that this activate main is not once per turn. You choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards and then KO it, and then your opponent discards a card from their hand. So this card is really strong if you just have spare energy lying about, or if you need to specifically KO a card that can't be hit with Broly. You can bring this guy in and start KOing your opponent's board. And the fact that this isn't once per turn is really strong, because if your opponent is looking pretty low on hand or has a wide board, you can just bring this guy in for free if you have Babidi out because of your leader's activate main, and then you can just tap all of your energy, KO a bunch of cards, swing 20k crit, and take a bunch of cards out of your opponent's hand. And this guy, especially versus slower blue decks, this guy can just carry games because he generates free card advantage off of his skill. He's really, really strong, and he's just really amazing. The only reason I only run 1 of him in the deck is because there is almost no advantage to having multiple copies of him out on the board at one time, because his activate main skill isn't once per turn, so you don't need multiple copies of him out to use that more than once per turn. The only advantage that it will give you is having an extra 20k crit swing. But I don't think that that's enough to warrant running a second copy of him, because he's so searchable within the deck because he has the Agent of Destruction tag. So to pair off with the Android 13, I have 2 copies of the Lord Slug Agent of Destruction. He's also one of the older Agents of Destruction. and he has a very simple auto. When he's played, your opponent discards a card from their hand. These two are basically like pseudo copies of the Android 13. The idea is if you already have Android 13 in play or in your hand, then these guys are going to be better than a second or third copy of Android 13, because on play they're going to do something, whereas playing a second Android 13 out will not do anything. And so they're just nice little ways to, if you have your leader's activate main skill unused for the turn and you don't need to do anything massively to deal with your opponent's board, you can just drop this guy down and force your opponent to discard a card. I probably will be messing with a more hand control oriented version of this list, because this list is a little bit slower than a lot of AOD lists at the moment. I'd consider this more a mid-range deck right now, but there's definitely ways you can take this into a more aggro route with some more hand control stuff, and you could also probably slow it down with the hand control stuff as well and play it a little bit slower with just like inherently gaining advantage as the game goes on with cards like Android 13. This Lord Slug does have another activate main, or he does have another skill, which is an activate main. Once per turn, for 1 green energy, you choose 1 Slug's army card from your hand with an original energy cost of 3 or less other than a copy of this card and play it. The only target for that in this deck is the super combo. So this activate main is rarely ever going to come up, but if you need one more swing on your opponent and your opponent has removed Babidi and you only have 1 energy open, you can just tap 1 and bring in your 2-drop super combo. So that can come up. It's in a very niche situation, very, very niche, but theoretically it could come up in some games. So it's just nice to have that option if you need it. Now, for some of the newer cards, I have 2 copies of the Bojack Rampaging Agent of Destruction. When I first added this card to the deck, I thought that it was going to be kind of trash, to be honest. I didn't expect it to do anything. It obviously does a lot in the Bojack deck because it's a way to get you to the long game, and I didn't think this deck really wanted to go to the long game, but it turns out that this deck can do a lot the longer the game goes on because of some cards we're getting into later, and also because of cards like Android 13. And I thought that because of Dark Broly and Aggro Sin kind of taking a back foot this format with their nerfs, I thought that this card would kind of underperform. And in the Bojack deck, this card can come in for very cheap because it can be comboed from your energy. So it kind of, you don't lose any card advantage by bringing it out in the Bojack deck. And I thought that you would lose too much card advantage by bringing this out and too much tempo in this deck for it to be warranted. But the more that I play this deck, the more that I feel like this card in particular really overperforms. Because a lot of the time you're leaving 1 or 2 energy open during your opponent's turn so that you have the option to Garlic Negate or to use your Android 13 counterplay. And this guy is just another option for you to have available to you whilst you have that energy open during your opponent's turn. What he does is, when he's comboed with, if your leader's a Bojack Brigade or an AOD, then you can pay 1 energy and bring him in rest mode. He has a Deadly Defender skill where when he's in rest mode, your opponent's battle cards with an energy cost greater than or equal to their current energy can't attack leader cards, and then when he's KO'd, he draws a card. He's also really nice just because of the fact that he's blue, and you want to charge some blue energy in this deck because of a card we'll get into later. And that's a part of the reason why this deck is mostly majority blue cards. So for the main reason that I wanted to put this deck together, we have 3 copies of the Majin Buu Aod Unison. I've been a member of the Facebook Dragon Ball Super Facebook groups for a little while now, and every so often I'll have a scroll through, and more recently I have been seeing calls for this guy in particular, but a lot of the blue stuff in general, to be banned, especially since the emergency ban list. And I was thinking, what better way? So people are clearly figuring out that this card is an incredibly strong card. I don't think it's ban worthy, by the way, but I think that it is incredibly strong, and people are clearly frustrated from playing against it so much, which I always love to hear because I'm an avid Bojack fan. So I figured, what better way to annoy people some more than to play a deck that brings this card out 1 turn earlier than other decks can. And so that's the reason that I put this deck together, was because I figured this card is so strong, what happens if I play it a turn earlier? And honestly, not that much, but it's still a very, very strong card, and it would be incredibly, incredibly good in this deck. The only reason that it's not like completely bonkers in the deck is because its activate main requires you to have a blue leader to untap one of your blue energy, and your leader isn't blue, it's black. So that's really annoying, and I kind of wish that they'd made it so that that effect worked with an AoD leader, because that's what they've done for all of the newer AoD stuff that works in other archetypes, is they've made sure that it works with AoD as well. But they haven't for this card, which is really annoying. You still get the draw one and you still untap your Unison, you just don't untap the 1 energy, which is honestly really annoying for this deck, because this deck does a lot for 1 energy during your opponent's turn, because you have the Bojack, you have the Android 13, you have the Garlic Jr. So you have a lot of defensive stuff you can do for 1 energy during your opponent's turn. Only run 3 because it's an expensive card in an aggro to mid-range deck, so you kind of don't want to see it very early on. It's still a very strong card though. You're still going to have access to the -1, you're still going to be able to get some card draw off it, and it's still a double striker that can block during your opponent's turn. So it's definitely worth running, in my opinion. I just recommend maybe playing it on turn 3 only if you're sure that your opponent isn't going to do much during your next turn, or just waiting until turn 4 so that you still have energy open for an Android 13 counterplay or a Garlic Jr. negate. To pair with the Boo Unison, I am running 3 copies of God Sealing Technique Trunks. I'm kind of testing this card out. It has a little bit of anti-synergy with the deck because you're also running your Android 13 counterplay, and you don't want to get locked out of playing that during your opponent's turn. And also because your Boo Unison is going to be coming down on turn 3, it's only ever going to come down with 3 markers, because you're never going to have the 4 blue specified cost to play it for 4 energy. You're going to be playing it off of your leader's activating main. So the fact that Boo comes down with 3 markers is kind of annoying in terms of getting your God Sealing off consistently enough. And I could maybe see myself cutting this card down to 2. And if you want to take the deck more aggressively, which I could definitely recommend, and I'll try and get a profile of that up at some point as well. But I would recommend cutting this card down to 0 copies if you're planning to take the deck a more aggressive route. So for other Unisons that we can run with this deck, and specifically Agents of Destruction Unisons, I have 2 copies of the Vegeta Aod Unison. This card is incredible in the deck and incredible in a lot of green decks. I feel like people really forget about this card existing, and so when I've played this deck in testing, and I've played this card in a couple of my green decks like my Lord Slug Mill deck, people are always caught off guard by it, and the fact that you can just clear a board through barrier is really, really powerful. And especially in this deck, because the double strike crit swings come in really impactfully, because once a lot of the time what happens is you're whittling your opponent's hand down with Android 13s and with Lord Slug Aods, and oftentimes that means your opponent has very, very few cards in hand. You can drop this card, clear out your opponent's board, and then double strike crit swing your opponent from 4 to 2 life, and then hopefully you should be able to take them from 2 to 0 during that turn. But yeah, this card, a lot of the time he just ends games. He's so powerful. For the next card, and probably the best card in the deck, might have said that about a card earlier, but really this card is the best card in the deck. We have 4 copies of the AoD extra card. So he has a permanent where it gains the trait of Agent of Destruction in all areas, so that means this card is searchable off of all of your cards that search AoDs, which is amazing. It's an activate main. You look at up to top 2 cards from your deck, and then you add up to 2 cards with Agent of Destruction in their card names among them to your hand, then place the remaining cards at the bottom of the deck, and you can't activate copies of this card for your turn, so you can only play 1 of these per turn. If you added any cards, 1 or 2 cards from your deck to your hand using this skill, you can then optionally take a life. So this card, if you hit the 2 AoD cards off the top, is going to be a +2, because you're going to be taking 2 cards from you're going to be playing this card, so that's a -1. You're going to be taking 2 cards from your deck, and then you're going to be taking 1 life. So you're going to be going +2 with this card. This card is just incredibly good. And the fact that it not only does it search out all of your battle cards, but it can also search out your Unisons because they have Agent of Destruction in their card name. And it can also search out copies of itself, I believe, because this card has Agents of Destruction in its card name. So that card's really, really strong, and it's a big incentive to run a huge engine of specifically AOD cards in this deck, and that's why so much of this deck is AOD cards, because you want this card to consistently work as much as possible. And that's honestly a big argument as to cutting God Sealing from the deck, because it's not an AOD card and it doesn't honestly provide all that much for the deck. I'm still keeping it in just for now, just for testing, but if you're looking to take the deck more of an aggressive route, again, I'd recommend cutting the God Sealings, at least down to either down to 2 or down to 0 copies. For some of the non-AOD engine cards of the deck, we have 4 copies of Senzu. So basically, we're playing an aggro to mid-range deck, and we're going to be charging blue energy probably at least once per game, and Senzu is just a good card to run. Like, there's nothing really more to say about it. This deck can do so much for 1 energy on its own, with the fact that you have the Garlic Jr. that can come into play for 1 energy and give you 2 15k bodies. You have, like, everything is just so reduced in the deck because of Babidi. Having Senzu available to you to just give you even more energy is so busted. My secret rare for the deck, I've chosen to go with Salzino. So, this is kind of a weird one, to be honest. Since Salzino got nerfed and he doesn't have Quad Strike unless you hit 5 energy now, the card has obviously become a lot worse. People really are underestimating this card. It's still so good, and this deck actually goes to 5 energy quite a lot. I believe in my match against Rising Phoenix Odyssey, we went to 5 energy 2 games out of the 3 games that we played. So this card, and we were both playing pretty aggressive decks during that match, so this card is really, really powerful, and people really underestimate it. There's a fairly wide variety of secret rares you can run in this deck. Like, Heroine's Lineage is one, for example, that I would definitely consider running. The Supreme Kai of Time is another one, but I don't own Supreme Kai of Time, and I think Salzino is stronger than Heroine's Lineage in the deck, because a lot of your battle cards are green or yellow. Like, your Garlic is, your Super Combo is, your Android 13 is, your 3-drop Broly is, your 3-drop Lord Slug is, your 3-drop Android 13 is. Like, most of the battle cards you're playing are going to be green or yellow, which gives you conditions for this guy, for the successor. And also the fact that all of your battle cards that you're playing are either 3 costs or 2 costs, and those numbers really easily add up to 12. So you can really easily make Salzino. You can quite easily get to turn 5 with this deck, with the fact that you're running the Majin Buu Unison and cards like Trunks God Sealing Technique. But not only that, but on turn 2 or on the earlier turns, like turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, you can still drop this guy just for the extra 40k swing. Even if it's not Quad Strike, it can still come in really clutch just as a final swing if you can get your opponent down to 1 life. And because a lot of this deck controls your opponent's hand, you're able to do that early on pretty easily. For the final card in the deck, it's pretty simple. We're just running 1 SS4 Bardock fighting against Fate. I could see myself running 2 copies and maybe cutting the God Sealing Trunks down to 2 copies, but basically I don't own 2 copies of this card. This card's just great though for cleaning up games where you couldn't otherwise do so. You fill up your drop area quite quickly with this deck if you're playing the 3-drop Broly enough, and it's an aggro mid-range deck, and pretty much any aggro mid-range deck is going to be running this Fighting Against Fate card because it's just the best overarm in the game pretty much. So that is the Agents of Destruction deck profile. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. If you didn't like the video, leave a dislike and let me know why you didn't like it so much in the comments. Any feedback is always much appreciated, and I hopefully can get some more builds of this to you guys later on, but I'm probably going to be looking to prioritize some of the other decks that I play in the Rising Phoenix Odyssey tournament, because this is one of the ones that I've recently played, so I figured I'd give you guys a deck profile of this along with the gameplay. Also, I want to thank you guys very much for 100 subs. I am working on something for that. It's just taking me a little while, and so it might have to overlap with another sub goal if we manage to reach that in time. But I've been watching out for that, and I really appreciate the support that you guys are giving me, so thank you very much. And I will hopefully can give back to you guys soon enough. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be a very special video for that. Hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile, and I'll see you in the next one.